Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you joining me from the Curses Foiled Again stream, welcome back. For those of you just joining me, welcome. We are continuing from last week reading the Victorian penny dreadful known as Varney the Vampire or The Feast of Blood by James Malcolm Rymer. So last week I read from you the first chapter. We're going to move into the second. For those of you who didn't see the first chapter, I recommend going back and watching it. Um, but we're going to get started. So, Chapter 2, The Alarm, The Pistol Shot, The Pursuit and Its Consequences. Light flashed above the building and various room doors opened. Voices called one to the other. There was a universal stir, a commotion among the inhabitants. Did you hear her scream, Harry? Asked the young man, half dressed as he walked into the chamber of another about his own age. I did. Where was it? God knows. I dressed myself directly. All is still now. Yes, but unless I was dreaming, there was a scream. Could not both dream there was? Where do you think it came from? It burst so suddenly upon my ears that I cannot say. There was a tap, now at the door of the room where these young men were, and a female voice said, For God's sake, get up! We're up, said both young men, appearing. Did you hear anything? Yes, a scream. Oh, search the house, search the house! Where did it come from, can you tell? Indeed, we cannot, mother. Another person now joined the party. He was a man of middle age, and as he came to them, he said, Good God, what is the matter? And real quickly, hi, Born Wrong and Teresa Hall. Welcome. Sorry you guys missed the first stream about curses, but thanks for joining me for Varney. Scarcely had the words passed his lips than such a rapid succession of shrieks came upon their ears, and they felt absolutely stunned by them. The elderly lady, whom one of the young men had called Mother, fainted, and would have fallen to the floor of the corridor in which they all stood, had she not been promptly supported by the last comer, who himself staggered as those piercing cries came upon the night air. He, however, was the first to recover, for the young men seemed paralyzed. Henry, he cried, for God's sake, support your mother. Can you doubt that these cries come from Flora's room? The young man mechanically supported his mother, and then the man who had just spoken darted back into his own bedroom, from whence he returned in a moment with a pair of pistols, shouting, Follow me, who can? He bounded across the corridor in the direction of the antique apartment, from whence the cries proceeded, but which were now hushed. The house was built for strength, and the doors were all of oak, of considerable thickness. Unhappily, they had fastenings within, so what when so that when the man reached the chamber of her who so much required help, he was helpless, for the door was fast. Flora, Flora, he cried. Flora, speak. All was still. Good God, he added, we must force the door. I hear a strange noise within, said the young man, who trembled violently. As do I. What does it sound like? I scarcely know, but in the closest was but it closest resembles some animal eating or sucking some liquid. What on earth can it be? Have no have you no weapon that will force the door? I shall go mad if I am kept here. I have, said the young man. Wait here a moment. He ran down the staircase and presently returned with a small but powerful iron crowbar. "This will do," he said. It will. Give it to me." Has she not spoken? Not a word. My mind misgives me that something very dreadful must have happened to her. And that odd noise still goes on. Somehow it curdles the very blood in my veins to hear it. The man took the crowbar, and with some difficulty succeeded in introducing it between the door and the side of the wall. It still required great strength to move it, but it did move with a harsh cracking sound. Excuse me, my throat's a little sore, so I'm using a breath spray. Born wrong, I totally understand about missing the streams because of the time difference. I'm glad you joined us for this one, and glad whenever you can join us. And Teresa, I understand falling asleep after work. Trust me, I do it all the time. Of course, I also work overnight. So, continuing. "Push it!" cried he who was using the bar. "Push the door at the same time." The younger man did so. For a few moments, the massive door resisted. Then suddenly, something gave way with a loud snap. It was part of the lock, and the door at once swung open. How true it is that we measure time by the events which happen within a given space of it, rather than by its actual duration. To those who were engaged in forcing open the door of the antique chamber where slept the young girl whom they named Flora, each moment was swelled into an hour of agony. But in reality, from the first moment of the alarm to that when the loud cracking noise heralded the destruction of the fastenings of the door, there had been elapsed but very few minutes indeed. "It opens! It opens!" cried the young man. "Another moment," said the stranger, as he still plied the crowbar. "Another moment, and we shall have free ingress to the chamber. Be patient." The stranger's name was Marchdale, and even as he spoke, he succeeded in throwing the massive door wide open and clearing the passage to the chamber. To rush in with a light in his hand was the work of a moment to the young man named Henry, but very rapid progress he made into the apartment prevented him from observing accurately what it contained. For the wind that came in from the open window caught the flame of the candle, and although it did not actually extinguish it, it blew it so much on one side that it was comparatively useless as a light. "Flora! Flora!" he cried. Then, with a sudden sound, something dashed off the bed. The concussion against him was so sudden and so utterly unexpected, as well as so tremendously violent, that he was thrown down, and in his fall the light was fairly extinguished. All was darkness, save the dull reddish light that now and then, from, near, from the nearly consummated mill in the immediate vicinity, came into the room. But by that light, dim, uncertain, and flickering it was, someone was seen to make for the window. Henry, although nearly stunned by his fall, saw a figure gigantic in height, which nearly reached from the floor to the ceiling. The other young man, George, saw it. Mr. Marchdale likewise saw it, as did the lady who had spoken to the two young men in the chamber when first the screams of the young girl awakened alarm in the breasts of all inhabitants of the house. The figure was about to pass at the window, which led to a kind of balcony, and from whence there was an easy descent to a garden. Before it passed out, they each and all caught glance of the side face. They saw they saw the lower part of it, and the lips were drabbled in blood. They saw, too, one of the fearful looking, shining metallic eyes. which presented so terrible an appearance of unearthly ferocity. No wonder that for a moment panic seized them all, which paralyzed any exertions they might likewise have made to detain that hideous form. But Mr. Marchdale was a man of mature years, and he had seen much in life, both in this and in foreign lands. And he, although astonished to the extent of being frightened, as much as as much more likely to recover sooner than his younger companions, which indeed he did, and acted promptly enough. Don't rise, Henry, cried, lie still. Almost at the moment he uttered the words, he fired at the figure, and then that which then occupied the window, as if it were a gigantic figure set in a frame. The report was tremendous in that chamber, for a pistol was no toy weapon, but one made for actual service, and of sufficient strength and bore of barrel to carry destruction along with the bullets that came from it. If that has missed its aim, said Mr. Marchdale, I shall never pull trigger again. As he spoke, he dashed forward and made a clutch at the figure he felt convinced he had shot. The tall form turned on him, and when he got a full view of the face, which he did at that moment, from the opportune circumstance, the lady returning at the instant with a light she had been to her own chamber to procure, even Mr. Marchdale, with all his courage, and with that was great, and all his nervous energy, recoiled a step or two, and uttered his exclamation of "Great God!" The face was one never to be forgotten. It was hideously flustered with color, the color of fresh blood. The eyes had a savage and remarkable luster, whereas before they had looked like polished tin. They now wore a 10 times brighter aspect, and flashes of light seemed to dart from them. The mouth was open as if, from the natural formation of the utterance, the lips receded much from large canine-looking teeth. A strange hollow howling noise came from within the throat of this monstrous figure, and it seemed upon the point of rushing upon Mr. Marchdale. Suddenly, then, as if some impulse had seized upon it, it uttered a wild and terrible shrieking shrieking kind of laugh, and then turning, dashed through the window, and in one instant disappeared before the eyes of those who felt nearly annihilated by its fearful presence. Need another spray. Almost done. God help us, ejaculated Henry. Mr. Marchdale drew a long breath, and then, giving a stamp on the floor, as if to recover himself from the state of agitation into which even he was thrown, he cried, "Be it what or who it may, I'll follow it." "No, no, do not," cried the lady. And I'll come back to that. "I must, I will. Let who will come with me, I follow that dreadful form." As he spoke, he took the road it took, and dashed through the window into the balcony. "And we too, George!" exclaimed Henry. "We will follow Mr. Marchdale. The dreadful affair concerns us more nearly than it does him." The lady who was the mother of these young men, and of the beautiful girl who had been so awfully visited, screamed aloud and implored them to stay, but the voice of Mr. Marchdale was heard exclaiming aloud, "I see it! I see it! It makes for the wall!" They hesitated no longer, but at once rushed into the balcony. and from thence dropped into the garden. The mother approached the bedside of the insensible, perhaps murdered girl. She saw her, to all appearance, weltering in blood, and overcome by her emotions, she fainted on the floor of the room. When the two young men reached the garden, they found it much lighter than might have been fairly expected. For not only was the morning rapidly approaching, but the mill was still burning, and those mingled lights made almost every object plainly visible, except when deep shadows were thrown from some gigantic trees that had stood for centuries in the sweetly wooded spot. They heard the voice of Mr. Marchdale as he cried, "There, there, towards the wall! There, there! God, how it bounds along!" The young men hastily dashed through the thicket in the direction of from whence his voice sounded, and they found him looking wild and terrified, and with something in his hand which looked like a portion of clothing. "Which way? Which way?" they both cried in a breath. He leant heavily on the arm of George as he pointed along a vista of trees, and said in a low voice, "God help us all! It is not human. Look there! Look there! Do you not see it?" And they looked in the direction he indicated. At the end of the vista was the wall of the Guardian. At that point, it was full 12 feet in height, and as they looked, they saw the hideous, monstrous form they had traced from the chamber of their sister, making frantic efforts to clear the obstacle. They saw it bound from the garden to the top of the roof, which it very nearly reached, but each time it fell back again into the garden with such a dull, heavy sound that the earth seemed to shake again with the concussion. They trembled. Well, indeed, they might. For some minutes, they watched the figure making its fruitless efforts to leave the place. "What is it? What is it?" whispered Henry in a hoarse accent. "God, can it? What can it possibly be?" "I know not," replied Mr. Marchdale. "I did seize it. It was cold and clammy like a corpse. It cannot be human." "Not human! Look at it now. It will surely escape now." "No, no, we will not be terrified thus. There is heaven above us. Come on, and for Flora's sake, let us make an effort to yet seize this bold intruder." "Take this pistol," said Marchdale. "It is the fellow of the one I fired. Try its efficacy." "He will be gone," exclaimed Henry. At that moment, after many repeated attempts and fearful falls, the figure reached the top of the wall, and then hung by its long arms a moment or two, previous to dragging itself completely up. The idea of the appearance, be it what might entirely escaping, seemed to nerve again Mr. Marchdale. He, he, as well as the two young men, ran forward towards the wall. They got close to the figure before it sprang down on the outer side of the wall. This that to miss killing it with the bullet from the pistol was a matter of utter impossibility unless willfully. Henry had the weapon, and he pointed it full at the tall form. With steady aim, he pulled the trigger. The explosion followed, and that bullet did in office there, could no manner of doubt, for the figure gave a howling shriek and fell headlong from the wall on the outside. "I have shot him," cried Henry. "I have shot him." And that ends chapter 2. So we have our vampire Varney chased from his feeding and shot as he tried to jump the wall. Next week we'll see where it goes from there. Born Wrong comments that the only thing I really remember about poor Varney is how he dies, but I promise no spoilers though. I'm also aware of how Varney dies, but since there we are 2 chapters into a 232 chapter novel, I'm not going to spoil it either. If anybody really wants to know, it's not hard to find out. This is 100-year-old novel. It's not like you can't find copies of it online. If you want your own copy, I'm reading from one simply called Varney the Vampire, Feast of Blood, with it, noted with an introduction and notes by Kurt Hare. The main text of the novel is, of course, public domain, given it was published over 100 years ago. The notes are, of course, not, which is why I'm not reading any of them. It's a pretty good copy. I happen to like it. I'd recommend it if anybody wants to check it out. One of these days, I'll have to get around to putting in the link to an Amazon. Excuse me, in the description below. Um, but I'm afraid that's going to just about do it for tonight. I've had a lot of fun continuing this trip down Undead Lane, as it were. But I do have to work this evening. Um, Hopefully, in the future, I'm still trying to get Brian to jump in on reading some stuff with me. I may reach out to some of my other friends, see if I can't get some semi-celebrities and past guests, things like that, to stop by and read a chapter for us, if anybody's interested. Uh, but we'll see. I haven't actually reached out to anybody yet. It's just an idea percolating in my brain, as it were. Um, at the very least, I think Brian and maybe anyone else I can shoehorn into doing it will get together and do a roundtable discussion. We're a little further through the story. But for now, you just stuck with my voice reading it. I want to thank everybody, by the way. I got some really supportive comments on part one, and I really appreciated that. I wasn't real sure about doing this. I'm not always the most confident about reading something out loud myself. I mean, I love to tell stories, and I love to talk, as you all know. But I do that from my head. I don't write scripts. I don't write. I don't even write notes. I just talk. Reading something prepared is a bit of a challenge for me. I think we'll get Brian to read Teresa. But that's going to do it for tonight, folks. Remember to tune in next week, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm not certain what next week's topic is, but we will have one. And then we will move on to Chapter 3 and find out what happens to Varney and our heroes. But that's it for tonight. This is Kevin Mears, once again, demonologist, Paranormal Encyclopedia. Say good night and God bless everyone. And see you next week.